experts in the business. Flowers, trees, fruit and veg, letter by letter, they're all coming up a treat. Everything we're looking at today begins with the letters X, Y and Z. Here's what's coming up. Why the world's priciest spice might just be worth it.
When you eat something with saffron, to me it's like a very good wine and you suddenly feel a lift at the back of your palate. You think, I like that.
The plant that gets Hugh Dennis reminiscing.
We had a massive yucca in our garden and I used to ride my bike obsessively round the kind of track.
And what to plant when your garden is a zoo.
I think that people forget that zoos are about plants as well as animals. We should look at the environment as a whole, and certainly here at Twyford we're looking at the bigger picture.
Just some of the treats we have in store. So let's begin with X. In our first subject, we look at a type of gardening that deliberately keeps water usage to a minimum, with plants that don't get very thirsty. This X is for xeriscaping. And to show why it can make sense, Steve Backshall went to one of America's hottest destinations, Las Vegas.
Las Vegas is the fastest growing city in the US, with over 4,000 people moving here every month.
And it's the residents of Las Vegas that use most of its water for drinking, washing, sewerage, dishwashers, washing machines. But the biggest user isn't inside the house. In the summer, 90% of domestic water is used outside. And the greediest culprit of all, the humble lawn sprinkler. This water never returns to the wastewater treatment plants. Much of it simply evaporates into the air and is blown away. It's lost forever to the people of the Las Vegas Valley. But it is possible to have a garden in the desert without wasting so much water. The McDonnell Elementary School has planted a new xeriscape, or desert-style garden. Hillary Robertson of the Southern Nevada Water Authority explains. What did it actually look like before?
Well, these front areas here were all covered in grass, which here in the desert requires a lot more water than we get through rain. So these desert plants are much more efficient and can survive here in the desert with an efficient amount of water.
What's the traditional attitude of the people living around here towards water and the use of water?
We have had such growth over the last 10 to 20 years that people come from different places and they don't understand the desert environment. They want to bring with them the plants and the shrubs and the trees and the lawn from wherever they came from. They don't understand what it's like to live in a desert and how important and crucial water is to life and how limited a resource it is.
So why choose to set up a project here in the school?
The school is the perfect place for education. The young people who take tours of the garden and learn about desert plants, learn about how important water is here in the Mojave Desert.
Whoa! Okay, now we're talking, huh?
What's going to happen if people carry on using water the way they do now?
If they continue to use water as they do now, we'll be in a lot of trouble. They need to cut back and to use less water and continue the quality of life that we've been able to enjoy here in Southern Nevada.
Thanks, Steve. Some of the best plants to use in xeriscaping are cacti. Shortly, Alice Fowler will show us how to grow a cactus. But first, let's meet Brian Fern, who knows all about what's out there and how to handle them.
A cactus is a plant that's lost its leaves, and the function of the leaves has been taken over by the stem, which has become green. The spines that it's got are to prevent animals from getting at the water that the plant is storing. And the ribs are to prevent the plant from bursting when it takes up water rapidly, so it acts like a concertina. I was about 10, I suppose, when the fascination first hit me. We were on holiday in Scarborough. There was a greengrocer's shop adjacent to where we were staying, which had cacti in the window, and of course they, looked distinctly different from anything else. These plants have got the lifetime of trees. They will live to 250 years plus. And indeed, some of the plants I've got, I can trace the history back to Victorian times. This plant I found 10 years ago as one plant in 20,000 seedlings, and I grew it up, and it's produced this beautiful variegated plant, which is unique. There's not another one in the world like it. The island of Madagascar has probably more weird and wonderful plants and animals than anywhere else in the world, and this, called Dibieria madagascariensis, is probably one of the weirdest, with its long, narrow leaves and long spines. I mean, it's just a weird plant. One of the biggest myths with these plants is that they never flower. But if you follow a few simple rules, then they will perform for you every year. You water them once a week all through the summer. That's a good soak. I mean, we use a hose pipe. No water at all from October to March. And that really is no water. Now, if you water them in the winter and you keep them warm in the winter, they won't flower for you. It's as simple as that. Keep them cool and keep them dry. If you have a wind to water them in the winter, take a watering can and cut the bottom out, and then you can go through the motions of actually attempting to water them but never doing so.
So I'm going to sow some cactus seed for our dry garden. Now, the truth about cactus is it's a bit of a long-term relationship, and it's going to be really quite a long time before I have cactus like Brian's. So I guess the question is, why would you bother from seed when little cactus, as we all know, are very, very cheap? And I guess the reason is there's nothing more satisfying being able to say, I grew that, that's my cactus from seed. So, with that, I'm going to try. Now, you need to use a really, really free-draining potting compost. So I've got regular potting compost over here, and to that I'm going to add a quarter sand so that it's a really free-draining mixture. That's really essential. Because it's so free-draining, you're going to need to put a little bit of mesh at the bottom of the pot, or else it will just run right the way through. And then just fill the pot up to the top. And now you need to let that soak in water till it's all completely wet, because it's only at that point can you sow. So this is rainwater, and I'm using rainwater because cactus generally don't like tap water. It's got a very high calcium level. And what I'm going to sow is one of these. Now this is Echinocaris reinbackii baileyii, or the woolly hedgehog to you and I. And it's a really sweet little cactus. Eventually it does get bigger than this. And it's winter hardy in the UK. Now, cactus seeds are very, very small. And because they're small, like all seeds which are tiny, you only sow them on the surface, you never cover them. Really fine seed can just be tapped off your hand while gently moving around the pot. Cactus grow in kind of semi-desert conditions, so you've got to think it's really, really dry, free-draining, baked, and then suddenly there'll be this kind of downpour of rain, and it's in that period that the seeds take advantage of the sudden moisture from the environment and have to get to work really quickly. So I'm going to spray the surface of the compost with some more moisture, because it's all about keeping the humidity high, which is going to make these seeds germinate. And to really, really lock that moisture in, I'm going to cover the whole pot with a plastic bag. Now, it's a really good idea to put a label in the middle of the pot, because that just keeps the plastic bag from collapsing in on itself. And then wrap it with a rubber band to lock the moisture in. And this way, I'm going to recreate really humid conditions. And you'll be surprised. They're quite fast to germinate. It's there on in that they start to grow very, very slowly. So they need a daytime temperature of roughly 25 to 30 degrees Celsius and a nighttime temperature of, say, 18 to 20. So that's going to be the hot end of this greenhouse, or, say, a baked windowsill.
Thanks, Alice. Now, X isn't the easiest letter to take on, as you can imagine. So we'll be using a bit of artistic license. And for our next subject, we're joining Chris Beardshaw on a trip around southwest Ireland, because he's looking at X for exotic plants.
This area is so unique because of one thing, the Gulf Stream. Its warm currents originate in the Caribbean, wash across the Atlantic, and then straight up the deep glaciated valleys and into the gardens of West Cork.
The effect of the Gulf Stream is that exotic plants rule in the garden. It's all a result of temperatures here being an average 4 degrees higher than in mainland Britain.
That may not sound like a lot, but if you're a gardener, it opens up a wealth of horticultural opportunities, and the proof is right here. This is Fota Arboretum. This land was acquired by the Smith-Barry family back in the Norman period, but it was their Victorian ancestors that really started to take an interest in the gardens. Like all Victorians, they had a passion for collecting, and their particular passion was horticulture, so much so that they sent plant hunters worldwide looking for unusual species. But while most Victorians had to grow their newly introduced tender exotics under glass or in conservatories, the Smith-Barrys were fortunate. The weather here is so mild, they could stick the plants in the ground. But these tender plants don't just survive, they positively thrive. Just take a look at this, the Canary Island date palm. This plant's been here for over 100 years, and it's reputed to be the tallest and oldest in Britain and Ireland. And what makes this arboretum absolutely unique is that here you'll find tender exotics thriving from every continent in the world. Left alone, these exotic plants find their own natural habitat, and if gardeners learn to breed the microclimate as well as their plants do, well, the most extraordinary things result. And one person who really knows about their landscape lives right down here. In fact, it's right on the edge of the beach.
Despite being on such an exposed site, Mary Walsh has become an expert in tender exotics. And all because she understands her microclimate.
So is this just one constant slope when you've cut into it?
It was, yeah, it was. It was pretty disastrous looking in the beginning, yeah. The rocks actually come from this plot, you know, and give out so much heat. And then the summers have been so good, and winters haven't been bad either.
You're the first gardener I've ever spoken to who hasn't complained about the weather. Every other gardener that I've spoken to says, oh, well, the winter wasn't very good. That's why my plants aren't looking very good.
There are, they won't do. Cassia behind next one,
Now this shouldn't be going outside, should it?
Yeah,
Cassia.
no, it's supposed to be a conservative plant. Yeah.
And how long has this one been in?
That was one of the first ones, and when it did so well, I realised that there was a potential for more exotics here. And it blooms way in, like, into the winter until about February.
But it's a fantastic flower.
Yeah.
Very rich colour.
Yeah.
Presumably your agaves stay outside all year
Oh,
round.
absolutely. There's no way. And look at all the babies it's had.
I mean, I can put exotics outside, even just during the summer, but they always come in and they always look a bit sorry for themselves.
Yes.
But yours stay outside all year round, and there's not a sign of a sort of blemish on the leaf at all.
I think if you can leave them out, it's so much better, because they just form such a natural path for themselves instead of just planting them back out again.
Yeah. Do you find that even after a few years you're still learning about the conditions in the garden? Because presumably it's not the same across the garden, from the lawn up onto the top terrace.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not the same. And I've discovered quite recently, in the past year, that down here, that bank there, I can grow much more tender things there. They get the heat from the rocks and the sun. They have the protection of other shrubs from the salt winds. So it seems to be the ideal place. So there'll be lots of changes.
I was going to say, you're going to be taking all those things out over there, aren't you?
Yeah.
Putting a whole layer.
And it's not just plants and flowers that can be exotic. Here's Joe Swift checking out exotic vegetables at the Hampton Court Palace Flower Show and getting some cooking tips too.
Hampton Court doesn't stop at showing you ways to grow new fruit and vegetables. There's also daily advice on how to cook them from a range of top chefs and growers in the Growing Taste Theatre. And one of the things I've been keen to learn more about this week is how to include some of the exotic vegetables at the shows into recipes at home. So who better to ask than Adam Gray? Now, he's the head chef at one of London's top restaurants, Rose 24. I know you're really keen on your seasonal vegetables, aren't you?
Yes, I am. I mean, you know, we use a lot of seasonal vegetables, and look at these cabbages, they're absolutely amazing. Yeah. But I'm after something a little bit different, a little bit more exotic. So, should we go and have a look at some stuff?
Show me around, sounds great. What are these then? Chinese asparagus beans. I'm going to pick one. Now, we've got a special dispensation to pick and eat. Don't come down to Court, start picking your own veg. Snap it in half.
Thank you.
I'll just go for it.
Yeah. Excellent. I think it probably work well with some raw beans, some peas, and a salad. Maybe there's some natural yogurt, a little bit of mint.
Your imagination's flowing already. I'm just thinking that tastes like a nice bean. What about this okra? They're a really pretty plant, aren't they? So I'm thinking of the aesthetics already. But look, the foliage I'm looking at first. Yeah. Could you still eat them when they're that big? They'd be all right.
Oh, definitely, yeah, definitely. I'd probably slice them very thinly and then saute them very quickly in a hot oil so they don't go slimy. Maybe a little bit of chilli and a little spices. Fantastic.
Now, about the medlar trees. I know they're not particularly exotic, but they're quite weird and unusual these days to grow sort of as a crop. The fruit of this wonderful tree, medlar, Mespilus germanica is the Latin, so I'm going to teach you something at the same time. Yeah. What do you do with the fruit?
You wait till the fruit's over and it's starting to rot. Cook them off, and you can use, they're like apples, so you can make a medlar compote to go with pork, or a medlar jelly you could serve with cheese, that type of thing.
Oh, okay, I'll have to give that one a go as well. This polytunnel in the homegrown area is just packed full of exotic stuff. Look at this radish. Enormous radish, dragon.
You can eat these flowers with these tomatoes.
What, the flowers of the radish?
Yeah, this is a tomato.
I don't think I've tasted the flower of the radish.
No, so...
Why don't you pick one?
Pick one.
Still there, is that going to be hot or what?
It's a little bit of pepperiness with the tomato.
Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers. Nice, you get a little bit of the pepper coming through from the radish flower.
Quite hot, actually. The
very nice.
Goes very... What a beautiful combination.
Yeah, beautiful.
Delicious. What about these chilies then, eh? Quite big bushes.
They're quite big bushes, but the chilies are really small, so I think they're going to be absolutely going to blow your head off.
You don't reckon we should try one? Go on, you go first. Yeah, and I'll have 1 second.
No, I think I'll give it a miss. I like spicy food, but these look deadly.
Okay.
Do you want to have a go?
You know what, I think I might give that a miss too. I'll take your advice.
Cowards. And there's a bit of an eating and gardening combination in our next subject too. This X is for expensive. And Lucy Worsley is on the Welsh borders looking at saffron, both spicy and pricey.
The local baker, Wyn Roberts, has been making something special for me, something you wouldn't expect to find in Wales. Hi there, Wyn.
Hi.
So, this is what I've come to see. How would you describe the scent of it, then? What's it like?
Like a sweet, come sour, earthy.
So it's quite hard to categorise, isn't it?
Very hard.
There's also something a bit rough and wild about it. We're making buns with saffron, the most expensive spice in the world. Oops. Do you know, it was really, really common in medieval and Tudor diets. They loved it.
Good luck.
Believe it or not, this saffron was grown just up the road from here, in Wales. It's a spice we associate with exotic foreign places, but actually it has a long British history. Why does this feel rude? England was once a major grower of saffron, and entire towns made their name from it. By the 16th century, Chipping Walden in Essex was so famous for the spice that it became known as Saffron Walden. Look at these lovely buns! It's a spice whose taste nearly defies description.
There's an aftertaste, huh?
Yeah, definitely. There's something exotic about it. Very nice indeed. Autumn crocuses hold the secret of saffron.
They've been cultivated by humans for 5,000 years.
And the only reason they're growing in this corner of North Wales is Caroline Myden. What's the correct picking technique?
Well, you want to go as far down the stem as you can, not picking a leaf.
Like
that?
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
So those are its 3 red stigmas, female organs of the plant, the bit we want, and the yellow stamens, male part of the plant.
That's right.
We don't want.
No.
Saffron is the product not of nature, but of thousands of years of hard work. The crocuses have been so extensively bred for their stigmas that they're now sterile. They can't reproduce without our help.
It may have come over with the Romans. They introduced so many things, didn't they? But because saffron is human dependent, the saffron dies out in the land and it has to be reintroduced. We have surges of historic reintroduction of saffron for quite different reasons. Edward III, when he wanted the wool to develop into a cloth trade, encouraged dyeing, and saffron then became one of the big dyes.
By the 19th century, British saffron was in decline. It was labour-intensive, and the expanding empire sucked in ever more spices. In saffron's English heyday, it was grown in the hot, dry soils of Essex, Norfolk and Suffolk, not wet old Wales.
When we started growing it in 85, we didn't know how to grow it. We've got rather nasty clay soil here, and it prefers a chalky, sandy soil. But we've added quite a bit of sand and compost. Yeah, it likes a very hot summer and then a drop in soil temperature to trigger flowering.
Harvesting saffron is so delicate that it's almost always done by hand. So what happens to the red stigmas next? What do we do with those?
Take a flower and gather together the three, and then you get the end and you see how far you can pull it down the stem.
Oh, okay.
And we've got to dry them. The whole secret of turning, this is called wet saffron, into hay, which is the spice, is in the drying. And there are as many ways of drying saffron as there are of picking it, probably.
It's a painstaking process, but when a spice costs £4,000 a kilo, it's worth it. I got a bit daunted by the fact that you need 150 crocuses to produce just 1 gram, but actually 1 gram is a lot of saffron, isn't it?
Well, 1 gram is between 450 and 500 threads.
Yeah.
And if you're having between 10 and 20 threads a pinch, you're going to get between 20 to 40 meals out of that, aren't you?
Out of 1 gram only?
Yes. It is very good value because you only need a very little bit of it.
Do you like the taste of saffron?
Yes, I do. It's more a sensation than a taste. When you eat something with saffron, to me, it's like a very good wine, and you suddenly feel a lift at the back of your palate, and you think, I like that.
But what I really like is the colour.
Yes, it's a beautiful, clear yellow, isn't it? There's no colour like saffron yellow, sunlight yellow.
Thanks, Lucy. Well, that's it for the X's. Let's move on to the letter Y, and we start with a tree that's got some dark connotations. This Y is for the yew tree. Here's Will Cohu with a look at its bad reputation.
I've been trying to convince you that trees are our good friends. They shelter us, and they feed us, and they help to make the very air that we breathe. But like us, they have a darker and more dangerous side.
There is one tree, a familiar tree in everyday village life, which has an enduring association with death. It is that shaggy, evergreen inhabitant of churchyards, the ancient yew. To some, it's the most spiritually important of our native trees, but to others, it's a graveyard ghoul. Why do old yews and old churches seem inseparable, as if the tree germinated when the foundation stones were laid? Some believe that the early Christians built churches where yew groves had once marked places of pagan worship. The yew tree's power to regenerate from an apparently dead stump chimed with the Christian belief in life everlasting. Yews can certainly live a very long time, comfortably more than 1,000 years, and legend puts some yews at 3,000 years old. But dating ancient trees is tricky because they tend to go hollow inside, and there are no growth rings to study.
Is this tree a ghoul? Certainly it likes to send its roots far down amongst the bones of long-gone generations. We have a natural suspicion of living things that enjoy the company of the dead, particularly if they have a taste for blood. Gardeners have long known that the yew likes a bit of blood and bone, and oddly, yew wood is blood red at its core.
Such vampiric stuff may be fanciful, but the yew's deadly reputation has a basis in fact. The yew contains poisons which cause vomiting, nausea, coma, and death. There is no antidote.
Now, which part of the yew do you suppose is the most poisonous? Now, I'm imagining that you would think it's these lovely, attractive red berries here, and while that's a perfectly natural assumption, it is, in fact, wrong, because while the pip or aril at the centre is toxic, the red flesh is edible. And in fact, the most poisonous part of the yew is this soft green foliage here, and a few handfuls of that would probably do for me.
This tree does not like to be hacked or eaten. It often kills grazing livestock, though there is some evidence that deer may even get a kick out of eating it, like a double espresso. The good news is that we have learned how to live alongside the yew. There has not been a case of fatal poisoning in Britain since records began.
As it happens, the yew has saved many more lives than it has taken, because extracts from the foliage can be used to make drugs, called taxanes.
They destroy the ability of cancer cells to divide and spread.
Now, while these are not miracle cures, the yew has resurrected the hopes of many people who have been at death's door. As so often in nature, what kills can also cure.
Today, big yews are rare, possibly because their reputation for toxicity is at odds with our risk-averse world. But the departed can come to no further harm. And as for the living, little can be more beguiling than the shaggy green of gnarled yews clustered protectively around an old churchyard.
Well, you heard Will saying that yew berries aren't poisonous, and with more on that, here's Chris Packham.
Look,
look at this. This is truly beautiful. You don't often see this density of fruit on a yew tree. And what's unusual about this particular harvest is that every single part of this tree is deadly poisonous, bar one, full of alkaloids, taxines, which would kill anything that ate them. The one thing, though, that is edible is this jelly red cover to the actual seeds. And it's designed to attract birds, because what they do is they eat it and digest it, but the kernel inside, this bit in the middle here, is deadly toxic, but it's sufficiently tough to pass through their guts and to get pooed out somewhere else. So the tree has come to a fantastic evolutionary compromise. It's made one bit of it non-toxic so that the seeds can be spread around the woods. Fantastic. But one thing's for sure, I can't lick my fingers, and I'm serious about that.
But let's not just focus on poison and graveyards, because here's Joe Swift again, finding out why yew is top when it comes to topiary.
Packwood House is a Tudor manor house owned by the National Trust. The late summer borders are looking spectacular, bursting with colour, combining ornamental grasses, perennials and half-hardy annuals just beautifully. But topiary is what this garden is really famous for. This part of the garden is just so simple and has only two elements in it. The fresh green sward of the lawn contrasting with these yew pieces, the dark textured colour, and these are like living architecture. But it's the scale of them that's so impressive, and the whole garden feels like a church or a cathedral. So it doesn't surprise me that actually they're laid out to represent the Sermon on the Mount, complete with 12 apostles and 4 evangelists. With over 100 trees and up to 40 feet high, it takes a bit more than snippers and shears to keep them in check. Whoa! This is a labour of love, isn't it?
Certainly is.
How long does it take you to do the whole caboodle?
It's about 4.5 to 5 months, depending on weather conditions.
Right, so that's nearly half the year.
You end up with arms like an orangutan after about 3 months of it.
Most people don't have, a huge piece of sculpture like this. How do you get them nice and tight to start with and keep them in this shape? What are the golden rules?
If you've got a good sharp pair of shears, that's pretty much essential, because you're going to make a nice clean cut. There's less chance of diseases getting into the plant. You don't really want to be cutting in the middle of winter, because if you do cut below freezing, then you can be in quite a bit of trouble. You might get a lot of dieback.
And should you trim them every year to shape them up?
You'll keep the crisper shape, and you'll keep the shape you want if you're cutting them once a year. And that's the beauty of them. If you've got something like privet, you've got to cut it 2 or 3 times a year. Yew's wonderful. It's like the Rolls Royce of sort of hedging material.
Yeah, they're pretty tough, aren't they? They can take it. So, Mick, most of the yew are looking really, really healthy, but there's 1 or 2 that are looking a little bit dodgy, let's face it, like this one. What's the cause of it, do you think?
Yews like to be in good, well-drained soil. They just don't like their roots at all in standing water.
Yeah.
But now we seem to be looking at another problem, which is a fungus-like pathogen, which is known as Phytophthora, which we think may be exacerbating the problem even further. But again, we're not 100% certain, because just recently we've had to drain this area, and we've noticed over the last 2 years a slight change, and the growth does seem to be coming back.
So it could be a combination of things then, because they don't like really heavy clay soils.
No.
So let's have a look at the drainage system that's going in there, because it's quite a serious project, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. I mean,
you're draining this whole area of the garden.
The contractors are digging down to about 600 mil, and they're putting a pipe, which is about 100 mil pipe, perforated, on top of the gravel, and then the remaining gravel goes in to fill in the
And
area.
does each tree drain into this central system then?
We decided that in order to get oxygen to the roots, every tree would need a branch of this drainage going to them.
So is there any signs that this work has started to benefit the yews at all, that they're looking up?
We expect with the new drainage system, it taking about 3 to 5 years before we see a real change, and the yews looking nice and green and lush again, hopefully.
Fantastic. Some of them have been here for 300 years. You've got to keep them going for another 300, Mick.
Yes, there's no pressure there then, is there?
No pressure.
We say goodbye to Y with a little treat from Mr. Hugh Dennis, fan of the U, but not of another Y, the yucca.
Well, I like gardens. I really like gardens, and I like the kind of British obsession with gardens. This is the Cleve West garden. Cleve West is a garden designer, not, as many of you probably imagine, a suburb of Cleve. He's an actual man. Unlike this topiarised yew, as I believe it is called, with a little kind of pom-pom on the top. I've got this tremendous urge to kind of do that with one of the tops, but I'm slightly worried that if you push down on the tops of one of these, somewhere else in the garden, something explodes. That's a yucca. That brings back memories. We had a massive yucca in our garden, and I used to ride my bike obsessively round the kind of track which went past this yucca tree, and most days I fell off into it. It was right on the corner, and a yucca tree is essentially like nature's upturned knife block. I wouldn't have one in my garden now, obviously, to protect my children.
Excellent. That brings us nicely onto our final letter, Z. We're looking at a plant family whose members, at first glance, don't look that closely related at all. This Z is for Zingiberellus, and here's Carol Klein to take us through the family members.
Each week I'm looking at different plant families, a sort of who do you think you are of the plant world. But this week I'm looking at small groups of plants that are distantly related. Well, the groups might be small, but the stature of the plants certainly isn't. Today it's the gorgeous gingers and their totally tropical cousins, cannas and bananas. Beautiful perfume. These are Hedychiums, ornamental gingers. This one's Gardnerianum, and this is the plant that you would have found in Victorian conservatories, where it was grown both for its stature, but particularly for its perfume in the evening. Now, this plant has worked its way right the way through my hot border. It's perfectly at home, and all I do to protect it, and all the other Hedychiums in my garden, is just pile soil on top of the rhizomes during the winter. This is Hedychium densiflorum Assam orange, which gives you a real clue to where these plants come from, in the foothills of the Himalayas. And when you're in here, especially if you close your eyes in the evening, you can almost imagine yourself there. Well, anybody who loves exotic cookery will recognise this immediately. It's Zingiber officinale, otherwise known as culinary ginger. And if you want to do a bit of experiment and grow your own ginger, then this is what you're looking for. It's not hardy, of course. You couldn't grow it in the open garden, but you can try and start it into growth in a pot. And just fill your pot right to the top, because you're not going to bury this rhizome. Now, that's a really handsome rhizome, and I reckon I could get a couple of plants out of that. I want one of them, though, to be big. Really big and substantial. So I'm going to plunge it into the top of the pot now and just press it down so it's in close and intimate contact with that compost, just firm around the edge. Then the idea is to put it in a warm, bright place, but with a bit of luck you're going to have a really exciting ginger of your very own. Well, cannas, like Hedychiums, are rapidly growing plants. All the plants in this family group are from the tropics or the subtropics. Cannas originate on the other side of the Atlantic, in the Caribbean and Central and South America. And they grow mainly for this fabulous foliage and for these wonderful shot silk flowers, which look as though they've been pulled out of a magician's top hat. And if you want to go the whole hog, why not go for a resplendent banana? Bananas come from Southeast Asia, but they're grown for fruit in more than 100 countries right around equatorial regions. This plant is completely tender, so when frost threatens, get it inside.
Thanks, Carol. And now let's explore the role plants play in a very particular place, because this set is for zoo gardening. Here's Ben Potterton explaining why it's important and how a trip to Hampton Court Palace could help inspire him.
Twycross Zoo is the World Primate Centre, and we've been here for 45 years, and we've got the largest collection of primates in the world. And monkeys aren't the easiest things to work with from a horticultural point of view, because obviously they eat and jump on things. But the site's got so much more. We've obviously got a good elephant herd, we've got giraffe, we've got a good bird section. I think that people forget that zoos are about plants as well as animals. We should look at the environment as a whole, and certainly here at Twycross we're looking at the bigger picture. Some of the areas, like the flamingo pool, and we're trying to plant geographically. So we've got Chilean flamingos in there, so we're trying to plant Chilean plants, or broadly South American plants. In an enclosure like this, it's very important to have a range of sort of natives and non-natives. We've got plants like Gunner manicata, the giant rhubarb, which is obviously a South American plant that's found, you know, in the same area as flamingos. But also, we're surrounded by a flag iris. Behind me, you've got things like docks and stinging nettles, which we don't mind at the back of an enclosure because obviously they're good for insects. So obviously we're trying to garden the front, but leave the backs natural. It's also important that we grow a lot of plants here for food for the animals, and we're very interested in browse. Now, browse is sort of shrubs and trees that we cut and give to our elephants and our giraffe and our monkey species. So a lot of our areas here will be developed for hedging and to cut for browse species. To check the toxicity of the plants we have here, obviously we look on databases, places like Kew Gardens, and also what other zoos are doing worldwide and what species of plants they're using. So there's a lot of scientific work goes into it as well. This is a longhouse aviary, so the birds in this aviary are predominantly from the Asian subcontinent. What we're trying to do in here is we're trying to plant a range of Asian plants that will grow happily in this enclosure, also that will be beneficial to the birds. So underneath some of the trees and shrubs, we're planting a dwarf form of Miscanthus, which is a hardy grass that we can cut once a year down to the bottom, and the birds will work through, they'll nest in, and it should just cover the ground area.
Let me say, underneath all this, there's decent soil.
Yeah. John Thompson is our head gardener here at Twycross Zoo and has been for the last 36 years.
Well, this is the new trend, but it's not my type of work. I've fitted in with Ben. You see, I was just bedding plants, roses, the colourful subjects. This is more, as he recalls, biodiversity.
You need tradition in gardening today. People are very quick, just new. Well, John's, if he doesn't mind me saying, sort of 70, and's got all that experience that me at the age of 31 hasn't got. So it's a case of working together. My vision for the zoo is that we have a beautiful grounds for the public to appreciate, but also we're working with the animals and we actually plant onto the enclosures and try and get a naturalistic landscape back into this site. That's my plan for the next few years. My visit to Hampton Court should be interesting. I hope to visit the plant conservation area and get a few interesting plants for the zoo, and again walk around some of the display gardens and get some ideas. I got some good ideas last year, and hopefully this year I'll be with my camera walking around sort of picking up a few tips.
Thanks, Ben. Well, we hope he did pick up those tips, and we hope you've picked up some too, now that we've completed every letter of the alphabet. We've reached the end of our journey through the A to Z of TV gardening. Thanks for joining us, and see you again soon. Goodbye.